Hey guys, so this is actually my first tutorial like this, and I'm probably going to be a little nervous today. Not gonna lie. I didn't really prepare anything super professional for filming either. I mostly just wanted to test the camera, the lighting, the setup, and honestly, see how all of this is even going to look on video. But today, I thought it could still be fun to sit down together and work on a stained glass painting from start to finish. I'll show you the paints I'm using, how I usually apply the colors on glass, and just kind of talk you through the process while I work. So, yeah, hopefully by the end of this video, we create something really beautiful together. So, first, let me show you the paints I'm going to use today. These are stained glass paints by the French brand Lefranc Bourgeois, and honestly, I think they're some of the best ones out there. The colors are incredibly bright and clean, especially when the sunlight passes through the glass. I also really like that they dry pretty fast and mix together very nicely. But there is one small problem. The smell is honestly pretty intense. So, yeah, I would definitely not recommend using these paints in a small closed room without good ventilation. Right now, I actually have 4 windows open while I'm painting because I'm constantly trying to let the smell out as quickly as possible. So, usually I pick up the paint using simple wooden skewers. You know, those little wooden sticks people normally use in the kitchen for grilling meat. Although, honestly, I've never actually tried using them for cooking, but for stained glass painting, they work amazingly well. They pick up the paint really nicely. And then the paint slowly drips down onto the palette in small drops. And honestly, after trying a lot of different tools, I still keep coming back to these little wooden sticks. And as you probably noticed, I prefer wrapping the palette with regular kitchen foil. Honestly, I think I use cooking supplies for art more often than for actual cooking. Apparently, my relationship with creativity is much stronger than my relationship with the kitchen. But the nice thing is that the palette itself stays really clean this way. I can reuse it many times without constantly buying new ones. Before this, I used to pour the paint directly onto the white palette surface. And honestly, there was one advantage to that. Colors are much easier to see on a white background, but now I usually place the paint jars in the same order as the colors on the palette, so after a while, I already kind of know which color is where. And besides, you can always test the color first before applying it to the actual artwork. All right, I'm almost done preparing the paints now and letting the last few drops fall onto the palette. These paints are extremely liquid, so they kind of slowly drip down on their own. And I just realized I completely forgot to show you what we're actually going to paint today. So, today we'll be creating a really beautiful stained glass piece. It's a portrait of a woman in this gorgeous flowing dress with a very dramatic ornamental style. And I'm actually going to place the glass into the frame right from the beginning. This gold frame is a little damaged and worn out, but honestly, I think it adds character to the artwork. And besides, it's just much easier to lift, rotate, and move the glass while working when it's already inside the frame. So for me, it doesn't really matter whether I frame it at the beginning or at the end. And apparently, I chose pieces of plywood and paper that are way too large for this setup. So let me fix that really quickly and find something smaller. But one very important thing I want to mention is that we absolutely need a white background underneath the glass. Otherwise, the colors won't glow properly. And stained glass paints really come alive when light reflects against a white surface. Usually I work with long brushes in 3 different sizes, and honestly, I have absolutely no idea what kind of brush hair they use for these. So I'm really sorry, but I probably can't help you much with that part. So normally I begin by mixing the colors for the skin tones first, for the face and the body. For me, this is probably the most important stage of the whole process. The difficult thing about stained glass paints is that you almost don't have the right to make mistakes. I mean, technically, you can repaint something if it goes wrong, but honestly, it's such a difficult process that I try to avoid it as much as possible. That's why I prefer starting with the most delicate part first, applying color to the face, the body, the blush, and all the soft skin tones. And if everything goes well there, then later I can relax a little and move on to the ornament details, the dress, the decorative frame, and the hair. Because honestly, those parts are much more forgiving than painting the eyes, lips, and facial details. All right, let me bring the artwork a little closer so I can show you how everything looks near the camera. I kind of built this strange little construction in just a few minutes, so hopefully it survives all of our experiments today. Okay, let's see how this looks up close. Let me try to bring it even closer so you can see the surface better. You can probably notice these tiny little bubbles appearing inside the paint. Sometimes they disappear on their own while the paint is drying, but some artists prefer to remove them manually, especially in areas that attract a lot of attention. Honestly, I very rarely spend time chasing every tiny bubble away. My technique has never really been about making everything perfectly clean and flawless. I actually think handmade artwork should stay just a little imperfect and alive. So, most likely, we're not going to obsess over every bubble today because once the light hits the glass, everything will still glow and shimmer beautifully anyway. But we'll at least try to keep the face, the neck, and the shoulders a little cleaner. After that, we can probably relax a little more and just let the brush move freely. And this is how the skin already starts glowing and reflecting the light. Honestly, I think the first stage turned out really nicely, so now we can finally move on to the main part. Let me show you the palette again. And here's the important thing with stained glass paints. Some colors work very well together when they touch each other. For example, blue and green, yellow and green, red and orange. Colors like that usually blend together very naturally. So, when I'm using shades that are close to each other, I normally don't wait for the paint to dry completely before applying the next color nearby. But when it comes to very contrasting colors, like red and blue for example, I become much more careful. Because if the paint starts flowing too much and the colors mix together accidentally, you can suddenly get these muddy, dirty shades that were never supposed to be there. So, usually in situations like that, I prefer applying one color first, letting it settle a little, and only then moving on to the neighboring sections. Right now, I'm going to apply this light blue color to all of these larger areas first. And after that, we'll move on to the circles and smaller decorative elements. So the blue paint has enough time to dry a little before the next color touches it. Usually I work with just one brush most of the time. Sometimes I use a second one if I need to paint very large areas. But honestly, this is my favorite brush size, and I keep coming back to it all the time. And most of the time, I don't even fully clean the brush before picking up another color. Usually, I just gently wipe it on paper and continue painting. And honestly, yes, I normally use regular toilet paper for that. It tears into very small, soft pieces, so it's actually really convenient for carefully removing extra paint from the brush before switching colors. I do know artists who clean their brushes completely every single time. They use special cleaning solutions, dry the brush carefully, and only then pick up the next color with a perfectly clean brush. But honestly, that's just not how I work. And I think this brings us back again to the idea that art doesn't always have to be absolutely perfect and ultra clean. If the final artwork creates emotion, then honestly, I think the goal was already achieved. And very often, I also use simple wooden toothpicks in addition to the skewers. Usually, I use them either to remove extra paint or to carefully push paint into tiny, difficult areas where the brush can't really reach properly. Although, honestly, I use toothpicks much more often to fix my own messy little mistakes. Because, as I already mentioned before, my technique is definitely not the cleanest one in the world. But surprisingly, the brush itself can still reach almost every part of the illustration if you learn how to control it properly. Right now, I'm still working pretty slowly because I'm just getting into the flow of the process. But sometimes something really strange happens during painting. At some point, I suddenly speed up so much that I can finish huge parts of the artwork incredibly quickly. Mostly because I understand that stained glass paint is not really the kind of thing you want to leave unfinished until the next day. And next time, by the way, we'll probably focus more on dot painting details and decorative elements to give the artwork more depth and stronger ornamentation. So, even though I used to paint almost every single section separately before, you can probably notice that here on the hair, I'm working much more freely. And the reason this works is because of the contour liner I'm using. This is a special contour made specifically for stained glass painting, and it interacts with the paints in a really interesting way. No matter what colors or shades I apply over it, the contour always stays visible, dark, and glossy. So, because of that, there's honestly no real reason for me to carefully paint every tiny hair section one by one. Instead, I prefer applying several different shades at the same time and then softly blending them together directly on the glass. And honestly, this makes my life so much easier. It speeds up the whole process. But the hair still ends up looking very rich, layered, and full of different tones and shadows. And you can probably already see that some of the shadows almost start appearing naturally on their own while the colors mix together. At that point, I'm really just gently guiding the paint and connecting the shades together rather than completely controlling every tiny detail. So, like I was saying before, the red section's already dried enough, which means I can finally start adding the blue circles now. Because these colors kind of compete with each other a little. And I really don't want them accidentally mixing together. But this dark purple shade down here, kind of this deep violet color, honestly doesn't really fight with the blue at all. So even if the paint starts moving a little or flows somewhere unexpectedly, I'm not too worried about it. And honestly, another reason I'm relaxed about these circles is because next time we're gonna decorate them anyway. We'll probably add some kind of dot painting, little ornaments, maybe tiny decorative details inside the circles. So even if one color slightly moves into another color somewhere, most likely we'll be able to hide it later with the ornament work. That's actually one of my favorite little tricks in stained glass painting. Okay, so I think we can officially say that the upper part of the illustration is done now. The little decorative headpiece or the top ornament area. And honestly, I suggest we relax a little bit and move on to painting the ornament around the picture. For this part, I'm going to use paint from another brand because in my main Lefranc Bourgeois set, I don't really have this rich coral shade that I need right now. And this coral color is from Pied-Bot, so I'll just take it directly from the jar. Usually, I try not to mix different brands too much because different stained glass paints can be based on slightly different solvents. But in this case, I'm not too worried. If this Pebeo paint accidentally touches the Lefranc Bourgeois paint somewhere, well, nothing dramatic should happen. At least, nothing dramatic has ever happened to me before. The important thing is that these paints are not water-based, so in theory, they should get along with each other pretty well. But if we were mixing solvent-based paints with water-based paints, yeah, that would be a completely different story. Then we could easily get stains, strange marks, uneven edges, or all these little uncontrolled flows. And even though I keep saying that I don't work in the cleanest way possible, I still prefer my messy effects to be at least a little bit controlled. Sometimes I really love beautiful paint flows and unexpected stains in a piece. But not today. Today, this artwork is bright, colorful, decorative, and pretty structured. So we're not going to go completely wild with the brush here. We'll try to keep this ornament more or less clean. So for the ornament, I think we're going to work a little differently. Instead of painting section by section, I want to organize the process by color. So basically, first we'll completely finish one color everywhere on the ornament, then we'll move on to the next one and then the next one after that. What I mean is, right now I'm finishing this coral shade first. After that, we'll probably switch to a green color, then maybe light blue, then yellow. Honestly, this is kind of how I naturally see the ornament in my head right now. I already have this very bright, colorful palette in mind, so I'm mostly just following the feeling and balancing the colors as I go. And actually, working this way usually helps me keep the whole illustration visually connected instead of focusing too much on tiny separate sections. All right, so I think it's finally time to speed things up a little and move on to probably the most interesting part, painting the dress. And honestly, there's so much happening here. We have flowers, decorative elements, even a peacock inside the design. So the main challenge now is making the dress look bright and rich without overloading it too early. For today, we're mostly going to focus on the general color composition first. So I'll apply the main color areas, the basic shapes, and the overall mood of the dress. But all the really detailed work, the tiny decorative elements, the sharper structure, the ornaments, we'll probably leave for the next session when we start adding dot painting details. Because honestly, once the dot painting comes in, the whole illustration usually changes completely and starts looking much deeper and more dimensional. And on the dress, we're going to work pretty much the same way as we did with the ornament. So instead of focusing on every tiny section separately, we'll mostly work color by color. Basically, we'll take one color, apply it everywhere we need it, finish those areas first, and only then move on to the next shade. Honestly, this just makes the whole process much faster and a lot less stressful. And it also helps me stop overthinking every little detail while the paint is still wet. Because if I start worrying too much about every tiny edge and every possible mistake, the whole process immediately becomes much slower and much more tense. So for now, we're mostly focusing on the overall color balance and the general atmosphere of the dress first. All right, my friends. And I think we finally finished applying all the main colors. And honestly, look at how interesting this artwork already looks. Even at this stage, even before the dot painting and all the final details, it already catches the light beautifully and has this really rich stained glass feeling. But now, I think the most important thing is to leave the painting alone and let it dry properly. So we're going to put it aside for at least 24 hours before touching anything again. And after that, next time, we'll come back and start deepening some of the details with dot painting and decorative ornament work. Just look at how beautifully everything already reflects and shimmers in the light. Honestly, I'm really happy with how this turned out. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and hopefully, I'll see you again very soon.